Good Monday morning, everyone. Signal to noise here. Davis Michaelsen in for the vacationing Chip Flory, as always, here on Signal to Noise. Pro Farmer Policy Analyst Jim Wiesemeyer. Jim, happy Monday, buddy.
Very happy Monday. Over the weekend, I had my niece and her family in, and we went down to DC in one of the most beautiful days of the year. And there were a lot of tourists, so that made me feel good. And saw the monuments, etc., and that always makes me feel even better.
Sure. Outstanding. Outstanding. Well, lots to get to today. Congress returns from a week long break. We've got some RFS stuff to talk about. It feels like it's heating up a little bit in Russia. I don't. Where do you want to start?
Well, on the Russia thing, Putin, their leader, huffed and puffed
Hmm.
and kind of signaled that there could be additional action. He didn't specify if some of these longer range missiles from the U.S. and U.K., by the way, find their way into the battle, which they will. Uh, and then the U.S. Warned Russia is trying to steal grain from Ukraine and sell it. And then you had Russia bomb a major Ukrainian export terminal. And there's a big Wall Street Journal story this morning, Davis, saying kind of all the hurdles involved in getting the around 20 million tons of grain sitting there in Ukraine exported. So you're seeing again some more reassessments that while they could export some via alternative channels, the inefficiencies are major if it's not through their major port areas.
Well, and on the idea of Russia stealing Ukrainian grain and then selling it on the export market, didn't we see some pushback about 2 weeks ago from Egypt when a mysterious cargo of wheat showed up and Egypt turned it away?
Yeah, they flagged it. They
Mhm.
flagged it. Yeah, absolutely. And increasingly so, it's getting to the very sensitive question, how far should the US and Western allies go?
Mhm.
You can talk both sides of that, but for those people long in the tooth, as we say,
Mhm.
you don't want to be too passive on. You don't want to appease I hate to call Putin a leader, a person like Putin,
Mhm.
because they just go further and further. And you just have to look at Ukraine as far as what Putin has done to the country. It's looking more and more like what Russia did in Afghanistan, bomb,
Mhm.
carpet bombing, and in Syria, he made it in like a desert. So I think I know the sensitivities involved relative to escalation, things like that. But sooner or later, I think the Western allies are gonna have to call his card.
Well, and meanwhile, I don't want to get hung up on this particular story. Lots to get to, but you've got Belarus raising their hand, saying you can export through our country.
Yes.
Um, I don't. Belarus, with its humanitarian record, and a known ally of Putin's, that would be an interesting choice. I'm not sure what to make of that.
Yeah, I wouldn't make too much of it because they're at the hip with the
Mm.
Putin, and I don't think most people would believe it. But it's a way of kind of the fog of war. That's part of the
Mm.
fog of war, which would be noise.
Hmm.
The clear signal is that is noise. So yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'm just saying again, we have so many uncertainties relative to the Russia-Ukraine war, and this thing's going to drag on far longer than most people realize.
Mm. All right. Well, let's move on to EPA's decision on renewable volume obligations. There were several numbers put out there, and it feels like EPA Administrator Michael Regan is friendly the RFS now.
Well, he's followed through, and I love that now because I don't like to see the credibility of any cabinet member go down, and also our
Hmm.
president. And EPA is now trying to make 15 billion gallons of ethanol actually mean
Right.
15 billion gallons, and rather than follow the law, I think EPA followed the courts because they were kind of directed of that. And when you looked at the responses from the ethanol promoted groups, they didn't. Not many, complained at all, and that'll tell you, the answer to how they feel about Friday's announcement. So, and the waivers are pretty much done for. For as EPA does not see meeting RFS requirements, causing the small refiners economic hardship. So,
Yeah.
the ethanol industry has not had many wins lately, but on
Yeah.
these two, to me, they're major wins. And so, the 15 billion gallons is the highest mandated level for corn-based ethanol, and I think that's a very good win and a signal for the future. Now the focus is going to be, Davis, on the what we call the reset. What happens to the RFS from 2023 forward, because
Mhm.
Congress looks like they're not going to tackle this thing for obvious reasons. They can't get
Sure.
much done. So that's going to be up to the EPA, the White House, Energy Department, and USDA. And we're going to know some of that in September with the proposed rule, and hopefully a final rule by the end of this year. And that's
Mhm.
going to be key, because EPA is going to take into consideration far more in the future the impact of electric
Electric
vehicles.
vehicles. Yeah.
What about RINs for electric vehicles? So they've got some heady decisions coming up.
Yes, there was a specific mention of how of RINs from producing power for EVs and how those might be handled. That's kind of a mind bender for me.
Yeah. Well, the bottom line, the signal that you get from that, Davis, is that they want to expand the universe for RINs, because the
Mm,
major argument of the small refiners and the refining industry is the RINs. Now, I think a number of the big refiners use this as an excuse, because they didn't lock in their RINs soon enough, and then the market got ahead of them. But
mm,
this is a way of kind of, it's almost like from a corn production where you just, expand, production by allowing more potential acres to come in. So I think that's clearly on the horizon here. That's a signal that I'm getting from EPA. And also in the future, how they're going to deal with the renewable diesel relative to sustainable aviation fuel, because if there was any negative, it's that they, in order to get 15 billion gallons of corn-based ethanol, they jiggered a little bit for the bio-based biodiesel and advanced biofuels. That could be the signal that EPA is listening to some of the concerns
mhm.
relative to the soybean oil industry. Not only the current food price situation, but perhaps ahead, as more and more companies such as Cargill and others either build new soybean oil processing plants or expand existing ones. So that's going to be another issue that we're going to see EPA address in these coming rules for the reset for 2023 and beyond.
Now, quickly, in reference to the electric vehicle considerations being talked about for the 2023 renewable fuels standard, we've been a little bit critical, you and Chip and myself even, and on AgriTalk Radio, we've been a little critical of the administration for pushing too hard, too soon toward renewable energy, saying that we're not quite ready. The infrastructure just isn't there quite yet. You're pushing too hard. Is including some of these factors in the 23 RFS laying some groundwork? Does that make us a little bit more comfortable that hey, we're inching that way rather than sprinting that way?
Well, with Chip going on vacation, I'll say this. Okay. I don't think he's ever going to be happy relative to the electric vehicles. Okay.
Agreed.
Chip. Yes. Myself, yeah, if there's a phase in for policy related maneuvers relative to electric vehicles, that's the right approach.
Mhm.
And where the administration does have significant criticism directed at them, and I think for good reason, is that their transition was too quick. So you can't go from crude oil to either hybrids or electric vehicles in a few years. It's just not that way. You mentioned the electric grid. But you have to have the production, confidence in production of the precious minerals, cadmium, nickel, other minerals used in the production of batteries. The technology is getting better. Elon Musk is going after renewable batteries. And I think all that's in the future. So what I just said is it's going to be probably 2 decades before we get to some of the numbers that we've seen. But I don't care what anybody says on this one. The what we're going through right now relative to the still escalating gasoline prices
Mhm.
and diesel fuel prices and propane prices. I think the signal is there that more and more people are going to go the bridge and get a hybrid car and or take their stab at electric vehicles in the next few years because they don't want part of this. Knowing full well the negative short term, because there's a story in the Wall Street Journal today that a person took a longer term trip in an electric vehicle and they said it took them more time to uh, to 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 charge up their batteries than it took them to make the trip. So that's the fear that people have. That and that's why you can't go too far right now. But that's going to get better and better. So bottom line, this industry is going to dramatically change over the next 20 years.
Well, and bipartisan energy talks in the Senate, according to Joe Manchin, are apparently over. Does this set the Democrats on sort of a course for a Democrat-only deal via another budget reconciliation measure?
Absolutely. Now, the majority of observers in Washington are saying they don't see the Democratic Congress, because they control, in quotes, both the House and the Senate, getting anything major done. I think that they're wrong because the Democrats know it's going to be a bloodbath for them in the November 8th elections, especially in the House. So they want one more bill. Okay. Now, what I think some of the analysts, and this is where I'm going to be wrong if I'm wrong, I think where most of the analysts are not seeing this is that some features of Obamacare expire in January next year. Now, the Democrats, that's like sacred ground to them, that topic. They want to extend, they want to modify it to extend some of the expiring provisions. This is the way to do it through budget reconciliation. And by adding that to the social spending and green energy bill, that'll get them more votes than they normally may not have. And I think that's the secret. But we're going to have the time. The clock is ticking on this one. If they don't get it done by the end of July this year, everything they're off the most, if not all of August and even into the first week of September. So they've got a lot to chew through. But I think the will is there in the Senate because the House will be able to pass it. And if Manchin signs off, and if because there'll be some of the principles that he wanted, budget deficit reduction, there'll be some taxes increase, not nearly as much as what some of the other Democrats want. And I think both Manchin and the other centrist, Senator Sinema, Kirsten Sinema from Arizona, have probably already signed off on this. So I think it's going to be a go. Now, what does that mean for agriculture? It could be huge because if this passes, there's your signal to the industry that's already thinking this thing's going to go, apparently, in the soybean oil industry, that although it might be phased in, this $1.25 per gallon or so incentive or subsidy for sustainable aviation fuel could be utilized by the airlines to service their carbon mitigation offset for some of these rules that's going to be embodied in this new legislation. And that will send the signal that we're going to have more soybean acres in the years ahead. So it's a major thing to watch. I think it's my biggest thing other than elections, coming up
Mm.
November 8th. This is the biggie for me that I'm going to focus on between now and say the end of July, Davis.
We got a question in here on the chat from Melody. And Jim, you reported, was it last week, about a report out that said as much as 2/3 of the United States is at risk for some sort of power shortage
Yes.
in the coming summer. Part of that is because of drought, declining water levels, problems with hydroelectricity.
Yes.
Another component of that is perhaps an accelerated move toward renewable sources of energy, which maybe aren't quite ready to service the public the way that some would like it to. I've got Melody here saying one regional catastrophic power outage will show the fallacy of EV or hybrids.
Yeah. I'm not quite
But-
sure on hybrids on that because
Mhm.
that's the combination, but it will cause more concern out there on EV. There's no question about it. But again, if you're going to take a long trip, I would just say rent a car.
Mm.
Okay, rent a regular car. But I'll tell you, even that under today's environment, I'm going to St. Louis next week, and
Mhm.
for a mid-sized car through Hertz, it was going to cost me $600 for about 4 days, 5 days, I think.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
through my points, I got it down to $400. So that's not going to cheap alternative. But your point, Melody, is I think initially correct. One regional catastrophic power outage that is going to happen. It's just going to happen. But how long does it take and things like that? But this goes back to our infrastructure
Mhm.
reasoning that we have to build up the electric grid and all that other stuff. We have to get the power chargers out there, the fast power chargers for the battery, I should say, and the proliferation of them. And that's beginning. Wherever I go, I'm seeing new, at least out here in the East. I mean, my Harris Teeter has like 15 charging stations in just one station, and I'm seeing more and more EV cars, powering them, getting the charge. And it's much like the COVID testing. You're doing it at home now, and
Mhm.
more homes are getting those fast chargers installed. But that again drives the electric grid problems. That's going
Mhm.
to cause some initial problems. Short-term pain, long-term gain.
For those of us out here in flyover country, what is a Harris teeter?
Harris Teeter it's a supermarket. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's a
Okay.
big actually it's a Kroger owns it. Now everybody knows Kroger.
Okay.
But it's
Yep.
my favorite it's a elitist type supermarket.
Oh my. Okay, that seems about right. That seems about right, Jim. Well,
But
there's
it's a
the
very good supermarket because they got great staff, but they got a gas station attached,
mm,
to it. And I mean, it's a big one. And in fact, by shopping at Harris Teeter supermarket, usually I can get 30-cent reduction in gas prices.
oh, okay. Yep.
So I like Harris Teeter.
Yep. Yep. Very good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, and
Um,
Melody had another question on,
yes.
we're researching it, Melody. She's noticed a reduction in the varieties of certain seed available this year. What's the status of acreage dedicated for seed production and availability in 2023? Now, let me see if I've got an answer.
I'll sip my
Uh,
coffee casually while we wait.
yeah, I don't have an answer from some of my best seed company contacts, but let me just tell you how I would answer this if I was given that question during a speech that I'm giving sometime this week in Idaho to a cotton merchandising group. I would say that normally issues like this, the seed companies would tell me no problem because of their fields also outside of this country, Melody, Puerto Rico, Mexico, etc. And they do have their inventory, stocking, if you will, of seed. But we'll double check that and come back with that next week. That's a good question. And I like when people look ahead.
Well, on to Congress returning from a week long break, rising gas and food prices, several hearings, probably to focus on these topics throughout the week. However, there are some expecting the next upcoming round of inflation numbers to show just a little bit of a softening, some even when food and fuel are considered. What's your take on that?
Yeah, inflation is the number one issue at the White House. I'm
Hmm.
telling you, they're laser focused on it now. And I think, yeah, we could see a little respite only, nothing major. But again, I tell you, I went also over the weekend, not just to Harris Teeter, but who was it? Giant is another supermarket out here. I couldn't believe the number of shelves that were vacant with food.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is going to linger a while. While inflation may be tempered somewhat, it's not going to go down significantly between now and November 8th elections. But yeah, they're trying to find out an answer of this. There's very little they can do now relative to gas. I
Hmm.
think you're seeing some announcements this week that the Biden administration is freeing up at least signaling to Iran that they can expand some of their oil shipments to other countries. Uh, we know that Biden is going to go to Saudi Arabia. I think that was a significant change in his thrust, his policy, because he didn't really want to initially. And that, I think, is why Saudi Arabia announced last Thursday that they're increasing oil production. So we've
Yes.
got some respite there. Offsetting that is it looks like China's Shanghai area is starting to free up
Hmm.
relative somewhat from their zero COVID based policy, and that's going to increase energy consumption. So you have some offsets there. Bottom line, inflation, we should get some signals. What, Friday? I think it is. I can't remember when the
Hmm.
CPI is out, but that should show a little decrease in there. Whether or not that's sustained will have to be seen.
Um, a little bit of concern over what's going on in the tech industry right now. Some hiring freezes, even some job offers that have reportedly been rescinded. Walmart is expected to miss their earnings expectations. Is this a time to panic, or are there other factors at play here that are impacting those two specific issues?
I think that's the period of adjustment that companies like Walmart and others are having to go through, Davis. This is the world of disorder right now. It's a new world order geopolitically that we're seeing as a result of Russia-Ukraine war and China's flexing its muscles. On the economic side, with the tight labor market, although lessening to a degree, with the
Mhm.
labor participation rate getting a little bit better, not much. I think this is just the continuation of the labor shocks that companies are going to have to go through.
Mhm. Well, on another note, with elections looming, obviously Congress wants to do something about inflation if they possibly can, want to do something about gas prices. But the recent round of awful, terrible gun related tragedies in our nation, of course, have revived some talk about gun legislation, about gun control and things. Is this an issue that maybe Democrats may seize upon as the elections come up as one of their sort of core values? What are we seeing here?
They'll try. They'll try. The House this week, it looks like they'll pass some form of gun legislation, restricting legislation that will have a number of items that President Biden said that he wanted in a major speech last week. But don't focus on the House. Focus on the Senate this week. For the first time in many years, it looks like, led by Senator Cronin, Republican from Texas, it looks like the Republicans have got the signal that they have to do something on this one. But it's
Mm,
not going to be near the breadth of gun restrictions that Biden and the Democrats want. So I do think you're going to see something come out of the Senate, not this week. So whatever you see in the House, just it's not going to happen. But this is front and center of an issue, and even when they do that, it's once again we're going to have to learn that it won't stop in a dramatic way. The killings. It's just I think
Right.
it's in the I think it's in the, not totally, but in the mental health
Mhm.
area. We have to get not a control. That's too strong of a word. We have to deal with that again because I think we've gone dramatically backwards in the dealing with mental illness and related issues, such as what COVID has done to a number of younger people.
Mhm.
Of making them feel very insecure, losing their ability to be with friends and things like. I think that's all contributing to this. The family relationship or the lack of one at home. You
Right.
know, it's coming to roost right now. So, and that's going to take years. You do not change that overnight. Amplified earlier by our defund the police.
Mhm.
We're seeing more and more consequences of that in California. I mean, go to Minneapolis and see the tents in the streets there.
Mhm.
Seattle. I had one conference that was rescheduled from Seattle because of the lack of security in the major areas in Seattle. This is all, I think, grouped together.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
but changes are going to have to be made to bring back discipline and authority in this country.
Well, and our thoughts and prayers go out to the families and loved ones
Yes.
of those impacted by the gun violence that's so rampant right now. Take us back to the primaries. We got primaries held Tuesday. That's tomorrow in California, Iowa, Mississippi, Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, and South Dakota. And apparently, Sarah Palin
Yes.
is coming back to run for that lone seat out in Alaska. What should we be watching for on these primaries?
Well, she's not a slam dunk. Now, Trump is supporting,
Sure.
former President Trump is supporting her. So all those will be interesting. But of note on the Republican side, here's the key issue. We're going to see if if some of these candidates, if they're too far right, that's the typical problem Republicans have in years in which they're expected to gain a lot of seats. They don't as much as they could have because of the primary challengers within their own party. So we're going to have to see the lay of the land after Tuesday because this is a big number of states. We're going to have to see how many really far right candidates, if they usurped some of the more centrist Republicans, because that'll go into predicting some of these races November the 8th, and
Mhm.
especially in the House. And you saw Friday in the Senate Republican Senate primary in Pennsylvania. Dr. Oz won. His
Mhm.
challenger on the Republican side, even though it was a very close, a few hundred votes, I think. He acknowledged that even with any recount, he just wouldn't win. And Dr. Oz is a controversial candidate, and will
Mhm.
that increase the odds from very critical Pennsylvania state to don't go Democratic, because that would be a pickup for the Democrats. So these things are important to watch out, primarily from who are the party's candidates, because
Mm.
increasingly so you can be primaried out because of if you're deemed not far too not right enough or not liberal enough, they get you out. And are you a viable candidate for the national election? So that's what is all embodied in these
Mhm.
primaries, of which there will be many on Tuesday.
Gosh, if I'm being honest, I'd just as soon see both sides move a little closer to the middle and try to bring us all together on some
Well,
issues.
that's
Would
going to need a third party, in my judgment. I keep on saying, I wish we would find a candidate that can resurrect the centrists from both parties.
right,
In
right.
and I think the American public is so fed up right now that you talk about a signal that this town is going to get. It's coming November the 8th.
Indeed. Give me about 15 seconds what you're looking ahead to this week.
Well, we have a WASD report on
That's
Friday.
right. Yep.
And that'll be key because Pro Farmer is saying they're going to watch the corn yields on the June 10th report, because recall in May, USDA cut its corn yield projection, not based on a survey, of course, by 4 bushels per acre from trend line due to planting delays. Well, now with today's report at 3 o'clock Central Time, we're going to see, I think the estimate is corn plantings will be right at that 94% area. So it's going to get closer and closer to average. And will that prompt USDA to raise its corn yield some? Although, as Pro Farmer pointed out, it has no precedent of doing so in June.
Right.
Other points we're going to focus on, Davis, will be the Ag Department's second winter wheat production estimate and any adjustments in global usage estimates due to the war in Ukraine. So that's an important report coming up on Friday.
Very good. Jim Wiesemeyer, thanks for your time this morning. I appreciate your insights. Have a great week, buddy.
We'll see you.
And viewers, thank you for tuning in. Chip will be back next week for Signal to Noise when he and Pro Farmer policy analyst Jim Wiesemeyer will keep watching for the signals.